Hey everybody, Jamin here from Game Show. One thing I wanted to talk about this week was a development in one of the games I played as a kid. Well, an update of a game I used to play as a kid, Mortal Kombat. You've probably played it at some point in time, and of course the marquee feature for Mortal Kombat is the Fatalities. You probably remember that. It's really what made Mortal Kombat different, which were these sort of like big finishing moves that you complete at the end of a particular match. That's really what separated Mortal Kombat from other fighting games, Tekken, Street Fighter, Smash Brothers, and it's based on this arcade culture of like showboating, the ability to basically publicly humiliate somebody else. One of the big developments that Warner Brothers introduced has been the ability for players to basically perform them really, really easily. So they're charging people for, I don't know, some sort of cheat code or something like that. It's $5, you can buy it on the PlayStation Store, and understandably, some fans of the franchise aren't pleased that this is what's happening. So let me walk you through folks who don't necessarily think that this is a good idea. I mean, the argument is the same grudge that people have against other free-to-play games in which you can pay to get some type of advancement. So when Sony released the zombie survival, massively multiplayer game H1Z1, it shouldered these complaints that you could buy life-saving airdrops that non-paying players didn't have, or in World of Warcraft, you could pay to jump to level 90. So for purists, they're upset because, you know, one of the core value propositions, one of the things I covered in my episode about difficulty in games, is this idea that you learn a particular system, you achieve something really beautiful in that system, and sort of your reward should be learning this new thing, not just paying to basically cut to the front of the line. But the others, you know, the fighting game genre has become like a little bit, well, I wouldn't say stale, but certainly a little bit closed off. This idea that learning arcane button combinations maybe sort of defeats the purpose of what fighting games are ultimately for. And you certainly saw this transition with Smash Brothers, for example, which started in this place where it was much more complicated and sort of made all of these advancements to make the game more accessible to new players. You know, it's interesting. If you look outside of the world of games, there is this same type of balance between accessibility and expertise. One practical way that this plays out is the difference between, say, IRC and Twitter. So IRC, some of you might use this, a really, really old sort of chat room client. It's very flexible, it's secure, you can create rooms to chat about whatever it is that you want, but the expertise level is really high. It has, you know, sort of, you have to learn these strings of commands. Someone has to be, you know, a systems operator. Compared to Twitter, for example, which recently went through, you might have noticed that they went through a big change when you go to twitter.com to make it really accessible and easy for people to know what it is that they're looking for. So now you don't even need a Twitter account to be part of Twitter. And Twitter created a very simple limitation. It's got to be 140 characters. There's obviously some complexity that sort of emerged out of that system, and community standards, things like hashtags, which originally weren't part of Twitter, but then became sort of this common parlance for people who use Twitter. Obviously, you know, you have to sort of learn how to send direct messages, but the big shift, or the big desire for Twitter over time, is to make chatting a lot easier, to be able to send tweets to other people, to try to make it as easily as possible. I think at the heart of what's with the problem with the Mortal Kombat discussion is less of an issue of people paying to have access to these easy fatalities, but it's probably a failure to teach people those fatalities in the first place. There's an excellent 99% Invisible about Douglas Engelbart. Douglas Engelbart is he's a designer. He's created the computer mouse. He worked at Xerox PARC, and he gave you know, one of the most famous tech demos of all time, which I'll link to in the description. But Engelbart had this idea that people's relationship to computers should be such that that computer systems should move from simplicity to complexity. So this idea that you learn something in a computer, say like typing on a keyboard, and that should be a pathway towards more difficult tasks. And so like Engelbart had this very famous, not very famous, but like an attachment to the mouse that will allow you to do more things. It's crazy. I'll link to it in the description. But his big idea basically holds is that you learn something simple and then you should learn something more complex over time. That simplicity shouldn't be an end in and of itself. And you could say that probably the issue with Mortal Kombat is that they haven't done a good enough job in terms of starting people in a particular place and then teaching them over time to learn how to do these more complex things. They kind of just throw everyone in. There might be like a short tutorial at the very beginning, but in general, it sort of privileges people who just spend a lot of time sort of duking it out, as opposed to training people to get to a place where they can do more difficult things like fatalities. So I suspect that, you know, what's making people upset is a failure of game design more than anything else. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think. Hash it out in the comments, and I'll see you all next week.